Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Lavanya Pulavito Barrera, and I'm with the organization Vote Solar. Welcome to Updates to Massachusetts Solar Policy and What It Means for Social Equity, a webinar being put on by Clean Water Action, Vote Solar, and Resonant Energy. Today we have an exciting agenda for you all. Here's a look at what we'll be covering. We'll start off with an overview of solar in Massachusetts, and that'll be presented by Vote Solar. We'll then transition into talking about the SMART program and solar policies presented by Resonant Energy. We'll close out the presentation part of our webinar with actions you can take, and that'll be presented by Clean Water Action. And we'll have time at the end for Q&A. So as we go along through the various presentations, feel free to put your questions into the Q&A section that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to type those questions in as they come up for you, and we'll do our best to answer them by the end of the webinar. Additionally, if you're having any issues with Zoom and would like assistance with the tech, please feel free to use the chat feature to get support from Macy, who you'll see as one of the people listed in this webinar. So with that being said, I will now turn it over to Stephen Roundtree from Vote Solar to provide us with an overview of solar in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And Stephen, I'm in control of slides, so just let me know when you'd like me to move forward.
Perfect. Are you guys able to hear me? Sounds like yes. I think yes. Yeah. Wonderful. All right. Well, great. Thank you, Lavanya, and thank you all for joining us this evening. Once again, my name is Stephen Roundtree. I'm the Northeast Regional Director with Vote Solar. For those who don't know, Vote Solar is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we're dedicated to repowering the U.S. with clean energy by making solar power more accessible and more affordable for everyone. Vote Solar does this work through effective policy advocacy and regulatory efforts with a focus on solar access and equity. So next slide, Melania. Great. So why is solar energy important? And before we dive in, I'll note solar policy in general is really complex and few people really understand it fully, even its policy practitioners. Confusion is a natural response, and that actually favors the status quo. And so that's why learning together is so key. And I'll reiterate how excited we are that you all are here. On a similar note, we won't talk about every intricate detail of the topics we're discussing, again, because that's so much, but wanted to provide an overview of the primary actors and concerns that have shaped the landscape leading up to the SMART program and subsequent stuff. So what I will do is explain briefly why solar power is an important element in Massachusetts fighting the climate crisis and supporting thriving communities. I'll explain what the recent history of solar policy in the Commonwealth is and how policies have affected communities of color and low income. So yeah, let's get started. So electricity, is a critical resource in our daily lives, helps us cook, preserve food, stay connected, work, stay warm and cool, and see what we're doing. Electricity we use has traditionally been produced by digging up oil, gas, or coal, burning it. We know it's causing the planet to warm, and it's causing health hazards that unfairly affect communities of color and low income. So we're under an imperative to change the way we make electricity, right? But it also means we have a chance to repower our communities with clean energy that brings us local jobs, cleaner air, financial stability, and increased cooperation and resilience. I'm talking, of course, about solar. Solar's got an important role to play in climate mitigation because it's centralized and modular. You can build it anywhere, and it can be installed to meet a lot of different needs, provides a wide variety of societal benefits, reduces air pollution, can provide disaster resiliency when it's paired with batteries so you can store energy and use it when the power is out. It relieves folks' energy burden when they're paying too much for electricity. And in Massachusetts, it's ready to go now. So solar can be built out quickly on a large scale to meet our climate goals, and there's an existing industry to support solar power expansion. Next slide, Melania. Thank you. So we're going to discuss solar policy background. And to start, there are a few key decision makers relative to this conversation and to ongoing advocacy that I just want to name. And those are first the administration, well, what we refer to as the administration, which is the governor, and the Department of Energy Resources, which is an executive energy agency. And they're able to enact policy within defined authority from the legislature. Next is the Department of Public Utilities, or the DPU. They're a semi-independent state agency that regulate activities of the private utilities that operate in the state within their statutory authority. And the legislature. Like any legislature, they can pass different laws that either allow, mandate, or forbid activity by the DPU or the administration relative to solar, renewable energy, and anything, as we know. So to give you some timeline background, we're going to start the conversation, fairly recently in 2003, at sort of the beginning of what solar as we know it in Massachusetts started. So in 2003, there was 0.15 megawatt of solar in Massachusetts, and that's about enough to power, give or take, 100 homes. So it's really not much. It's a really nascent state of affairs. In April 2007, the Patrick administration announced a goal of having 250 megawatts of solar by 2017. During a time, so in 2007, there were just 3 megawatts installed. So it's still a tiny amount of solar in Massachusetts. At this time, the key valuation policy for solar was net energy metering. It's a policy called net energy metering, or NEM. Basically, it's a system whereby people who produce electricity on their side of the meter or from solar remotely can sort of balance their use with what they're paying to take off of the grid. So as you produce electricity on your rooftop, your electric meter will spin backwards and the utility will credit you for that electricity. It's a really simple policy, a relatively simple policy, I'll say, that has really served states across the country well in building out their solar market and making it easy and approachable for folks. But more on that later. In 2008, a year after the Patrick administration announced their solar goal, the Green Communities Act, or GCA, was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. This law set the stage for the future of solar policy in the Commonwealth. So among many other provisions around the state's own role in renewables and energy efficiency, the Green Communities Act created a renewable portfolio standard requiring DOER, the Department of Energy Resources, to ensure that a percentage of green energy on the grid increased year over year. So they're saying, like, we need to have 1 more percentage of green energy on the grid every year under this policy. So to do so, part of what the law did was enable private solar generators to sell the renewable attributes of energy they created on their solar panels back to their utilities, so the utilities could comply with the renewable portfolio standard. This is called the Solar Renewable Energy Certificates, or SREC program. You may be familiar with it. And so this program was combined with net energy metering compensation, and basically created like a really strong incentive for folks who were able to attain solar on the rooftops or elsewhere. Great. So there were 2 iterations of the SREC program that, like I said, were really fleshed out very quickly, faster than expected, in fact, by several years. This spurred advocates and legislators to create the next program, which ended up being SMART, which we'll discuss in more detail. Let's go to the next slide. Great. So a bit more on net energy metering and some of the challenges with that particular policy. Like I said, it's a basic policy, has allowed a lot of folks to adopt solar, but nationwide and also in Massachusetts, utilities have begun to oppose NEM because this is complicated, but in short, they find that it'll eventually disrupt the utility business model. There are reasons why it makes their operation a little more complicated. It potentially rewards people for putting solar on the roof and at the expense of folks who don't. And several arguments been made, but basically Massachusetts, along with other states, have limited, curtailed the use of net energy metering as a policy. And that's what we see in Massachusetts. So depending on what the size of your array is and what utility territory it's located in, there are caps on how much solar can be compensated at the net energy metering compensation rate. So when you're, if you're going to, enter the queue, or the so-called sort of line to interconnect your system, if you're not able to avail yourself of NEM, there are other valuation arrangements available, but they don't always pencil out as well, and in certain places and certain formats are not as feasible. So we'll talk more about that when we talk about smart, for sure. So let's move on then to the next slide. Move on, if you would. Great. Thanks. So just some key takeaways from what we've had in recent history with solar. Basically, the solar industry has boomed overall since the year 2003 as I started, but since the millennium, give or take. And that's exciting. Like Massachusetts is the ranked the 8th state in overall solar advancement, and we've got some really exciting overall numbers to talk about when we talk about the state affairs in Massachusetts. So to say a little bit more, there's approximately 2,800 megawatts of solar online in the Commonwealth. That's the equivalent of more than 480,000 homes going solar. I just see your note there, Lavanya. On the eve of the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously, more than 10,000 people were employed in the solar industry, including folks from construction operations, sales, business, and administration jobs. So that's all to say, like, there's a really vibrant, interdisciplinary market with a lot of capacity installed and a potential for more. I did hit on the diverse benefits of solar earlier in the presentation, but for our purposes here, I think it's really critical to look more closely at the numbers to assess more deeply what they mean. So 3 indicators for the benefits of solar, sort of like the direct benefits of solar we can talk about in this conversation are, who's making money from wages from solar, right? So we find, and this is information presented from SEIA, the Solar Energy Industry Association. So 88% of solar jobs in Massachusetts are held by white people. And so that means non-white people, have the meager lastings of that market, and it's not quite in line with who represents folks in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. If you want to talk about another metric of benefit of solar, talking about the potential for profit, and out of 545 total solar companies operating in Massachusetts, we found, I did a quick search and found 3 that were owned by people of color. And that speaks to a disparity in who's able to found these businesses and really drive them forward and really reap the material benefits of this line of work. Harder to define is the use benefits. Obviously, studies have shown that people of color or people who make a low income face disproportionate barriers to taking part in solar as customers. Taking advantage of solar requires some combination of either owning a roof, being deemed creditworthy, and being willing to enter into complicated binding contract for goods or services. Because these people of color and low income aren't able to take advantage of solar in a way that their white brothers and sisters do, and that could be construed as deeply unfair. There are ways to use solar if you're not a roof owner. We can talk more about community solar when we talk about smart. But even then, the programs in the last 20 years have not really borne out that the disadvantaged communities of people have been able to fairly benefit from them, even while they're paying tremendous amounts of money into state pots that distribute money towards the generation of solar. So I think those are sort of the important takeaways. Like, solar is here in Massachusetts. It's been booming. But there's ongoing cloying challenges with serving people of color and low income. So that's what I had, and so from there I can turn it over to Lavanya again. So thank you all again.
Thank you, Stephen, for your presentation. Now I'll turn it over to Ben Underwood from Resonant Energy, and he's going to give us an overview of SMART and other solar policies. Ben?
All right, great. Hello, everybody, and thank you, Stephen, for that really excellent context. Let's see, I think that I had made, I actually put some content on this slide a little bit after, but it might not have made the final cut. I'm just going to have to improvise here, but fortunately, I'm one of the co-founders of the company, so I should know something about it. Resonant was founded 4 years ago. We are an employee-owned company based in Boston, and we were founded really to directly address some of the issues that Stephen mentioned in his segment. And so I think we can, I'll get to a little bit more about, in particular, how that is affected and how our efforts to make the solar industry more equitable and to make the benefits of solar more equitable, how that has interplayed with the current SMART policy. So that is what my segment will be about. And then just one other brief note on Resonant. We have so far completed a little over 100 projects in Massachusetts and New York. So we're a developer of solar projects, which means we work with installers and with financiers and with community partners to kind of from soup to nuts, from concept to completion, to build solar arrays. And then of the arrays that we built, they're currently generating about $100,000 per year in annual benefits for people who live in environmental justice neighborhoods. And so what is an environmental justice neighborhood? That is actually going to have a bearing on how the SMART policy works. So I'll just mention that now. But environmental justice is a framework that the state of Massachusetts, or I'm sorry, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts uses to determine which neighborhoods have been systematically shut out of certain important state benefits and other programs that come from the state. And those are defined as neighborhoods that have a higher percentage of people who are not white who live in them, a higher percentage of people who do not speak English as their first language, or a higher low income bracket relative state. So those are the criminal justice criteria. So that's really where I benefit as we can. So yeah, ready for the next slide there. All right. Yeah, to underline what a little more of what Stephen was talking about, in general, I see three major ways that the solar industry can be helpful to environmental justice communities and can be of use to people who live in environmental justice communities. And I'm sure there are other ways, but it's helpful to at least think of three main ones broadly. So that would be in creating jobs. That's a really good way to transfer wealth. That could be in direct benefit that comes from projects. So if people are buying discounted power from solar projects, that could be a good way. And it can be in the ownership of the solar projects or the solar assets themselves. And often these solar projects will generate good financial returns for the people who own them. So, I would really use those as the three metrics for, are we as a solar industry being successful in serving the needs of environmental justice neighborhoods? Are we creating jobs for people from environmental justice neighborhoods? To Steve's point, we're really not in Massachusetts. 88% people are white. There's also a problem with a very high percentage of people being male, which is a separate but closely related issue. So in that sense, I maybe not the best messenger for this message, but I hope to at least be a good ally. And so, we're not really creating jobs. Are we really driving savings to people who live in environmental justice neighborhoods? The short answer is no, but I'll address that in a little more detail. And then, are we creating pathways for ownership of assets by people from environmental justice neighborhoods? And again, from the research that I've done, the answer is not really. Fortunately, it's not hopeless. So with the remainder of my time, I'm going to go over the way the SMART policy currently looks and get much more specific about some of the particular areas where it has shortcomings, in the hopes that that will set up Vic for the final segment to discuss what we all as a community can do to fix some of these glaring issues. So to go over a little of the content of this slide, and again, to put in context, some of the early programs that Steve mentioned had maybe 1, 2, 2 megawatts, 10 megawatts included in the whole program. We're at a scale now where we're really doing an industrial, large-scale development. 3,200 megawatts is a big number. And to give you a sense of the dollar amount of that, so without looking at the cost of the program, in other words, how much it costs ratepayers in Massachusetts, that 3,200 megawatt program will lead to, my estimate is about $1.8 billion of investment in solar projects over the next, I would estimate, 5 or so years. So yeah, a $1.8 billion injection of money going into these solar projects. And that's really the size of the opportunity based on the extension. The program originally was going to be 1,600 megawatts. Now it's 32. So that's nice. We're talking about a really big, a large number of large checks that are going to be written for solar projects over the next 5 years in Massachusetts. The cost on individual level is pretty low. It's about a tenth of a cent per kilowatt hour, but it is paid by everybody. So that's important to note. It is not just paid by people who have solar arrays or people who work in the solar industry. And then if all 3.2 gigawatts of that solar capacity is built, that would be enough to create $300 million in bill savings every year for residents of Massachusetts. And I'm seeing a question there. Is it, well, yeah, I guess we can get to some of these questions. I'll just address some of them as they come up. But yeah, that number is 10.8 billion. My estimate is that it's 3,200 megawatts that are going to be built over the next 5 years or so. So far, I think about maybe a little over 400 megawatts have actually been built, completed, and turned on out of that program, to put it in context. So that's about 1/8 of the total program has already been done. And then over the next 5 years, I would say, probably about 5 years till we get to the end of this program. And so, that can show you that at $300 million in bill savings a year, to put that in context, that's enough to reduce every household in Massachusetts energy costs by about 10% if it were distributed evenly, which right now it is not. And then noting the final point there, about 1,000 megawatts of the program have already been reserved. By reserved, I mean that people have signed up to participate in the program. So owners of solar projects have signed up that amount. I don't think that amount has actually been built yet. That's why I say about 400 or so probably actually been built. But 1,000 has already been reserved. So that shows you there's some lag. A lot of capacity has already been reserved that hasn't been built yet. And with that, ready for the next slide. Okay, so just getting in a little bit to the mechanics here. you know, how SMART works. So, you know, what Stephen was talking about was a major dust-up or a fight between utility companies and distributed energy advocates like ourselves around how much the value of energy, you know, how much should that rate be assessed at? What is the value of energy? It's actually a very interesting question because there's so many different factors that go into it. SMART is actually looking at, it's related to that, but it's actually different in an important way, which is it's what's called a feed-in tariff. And that is just a incentive that is paid for every unit of energy that goes above and beyond what the value of the energy itself is. So one way to think about it is, you know, that if I produce 1 kilowatt hour of energy, I can sell that to the utility for a certain amount, and then the state, or in this case, Massachusetts, will pay me a little bit on top of that to further incentivize you know, the solar industry. So strictly speaking, it's not just the value of energy, but it's also that incentive. That's what the feed-in tariff is. The intent of the SMART program coming out of the failure of the previous solar program, the SREC 2 program, to really move the needle in adoption among environmental justice communities of solar projects. So to kind of deal with that, that shortcoming, they are providing higher incentives for certain kinds of projects. And they've got a whole array of different types of solar projects that they're trying to incentivize, including parking canopy projects, floating solar projects, projects that are located on dual use agricultural projects. But to the point of this presentation, the ones that I want to draw your attention to are low income residential, so buildings that are owned and occupied by low income homeowners, low income community shared solar, low income and low income property. Low income property means affordable housing organizations. So there's an incentive for projects that provide energy to low income housing organizations. Low income community shared solar is people who are on a certain utility rate class, generally speaking, people who are 60% or below the state median income. So people who fall below that threshold can then qualify to be purchasers of energy produced by these solar projects, and the state will pay a little more to the owners of those solar projects if they have a certain critical mass of low income power purchasers. So I know that's probably a lot to take in, at least for those of you who don't do this all day, every day, but which I'm hoping is most of you. But you know, at a high level, there's different ways the state is trying to incentivize projects that provide financial benefit to low-income participants. You know, and again, zooming out to the three things that I mentioned, there's really three major ways that I think the solar industry can drive value, which would be creating jobs, participation in projects, and ownership of assets. So just to note that this entire program might have some, you know, might help a little bit with the ownership of assets to the extent that it helps people, low-income homeowners, get solar projects of their own. But it almost entirely is geared around helping people save money. And I would argue that in practice, the most value is actually going to the owners of the solar assets, and the savings realized by residents of environmental justice neighborhoods or low-income participants is not necessarily that much greater. That's what I've seen in my experience. A really good question in the chat of what do I mean by participating in projects? By that, I would mean either somebody who is hosting a solar array on their own roof, or who is buying power from a remote solar array as a community solar participant. So those are the two major ways when I say participation. All right, and then one big update in this program is who qualifies as a low-income customer. That is, previously it was just people who are on a certain utility rate class, the R2 rate class, which is available to people who are below 60% of the state median income, so lower income people. It has been expanded to be available now on a neighborhood basis. So the new eligibility criterion of the expansion of the SMART program is that people who live in environmental justice census tracts, not all three of the criteria that I mentioned, but just people who live in census tracts below 65% of state median income now qualify to receive these increased incentives from solar projects. I actually see that as a step in the right direction. When you're dealing with a utility rate class, it's a little bit arbitrary and can be hard. Location is much more intuitive to people. Next slide. All right. You know, I want to be conscious of time here, and obviously there's more content to get to. Just to underline, so far, these programs do provide higher incentives to the owners of solar projects to find low-income participants, but is it really driving savings to people from environmental justice neighborhoods or to low-income participants in solar projects? Well, that is the intent of the policy. So the legislation that created the policy is to support diverse project types and to benefit low-income customers. Let's take a look at so far how the program has performed against those goals in the first year and a half of the program. If we take a look at the next slide here. So, yeah, so of the 1,000 megawatts that are already reserved, 60% are ground-mounted projects located in the western part of the state out of that 1,000 megawatts. And again, 1,000 megawatts is a third of the entire program here that's supposed to last for 5 years. So, you know, 60% of that number are these ground-mounted projects that are larger than 2 megawatts in the western part of the state. And happy to talk more about some of the issues that come with that, in case that's of interest. But suffice it to say, for right now, those projects are not owned by people who live in cities. They are not owned by people from environmental justice neighborhoods, and to a large extent, they don't benefit people who live in environmental justice neighborhoods or low-income consumers. In fact, from the SMART database, only 3.3% of the total amount that have been registered so far provide any direct benefit to low-income consumers. And that would be to say, you know, low-income property, the low-income residential that I mentioned, or low-income community shared solar. 3.3% is pretty abysmal, given that we're, you know, arguably a third of the way through the program. And remember, we're talking about a $10.8 billion investment. You don't get that many bites of that apple. And right now we're landing at 3.3% inclusion. So the result is that SMART is failing to provide material benefit to people who bear the largest energy burden. And I want to see, I think I had another slide here. I can't exactly remember. Oh, okay. All right. So yeah, so I don't, but yeah, but just to round out my my part of it, you know, and so I guess I would say that, you know, the good news is that the DOER, and which is the executive organization that runs the SMART program, like Stephen mentioned, has decided to take a really big, bold step to increase adoption in the current program expansion in the form of creating a carve-out for projects that directly serve low-income customers. And that you know, that big, bold step, they said that 3.3% isn't good enough. So we're going to really shoot for the moon here and go to 5%. And that was their answer to the abysmal performance so far. And I actually even feel a little heated talking about it, because we've had right now SREC 1, SREC 2, the first phase of SMART, and the adoption rate is at 3.3%. And we decided that after those multi-billion-dollar programs in succession, serving almost entirely people who don't live in environmental justice neighborhoods, that 5% is an acceptable target. Why does the DOER think that that's an acceptable target? Because they're not listening to the right people. So it's my hope that, one of your takeaways from this, and I'll pass it off to Vic for the rest of them, is that it's time to get the DOER and the executive branch more generally, as well as the legislative branch, to start listening to the right people so that we don't have more programs like this one that falls flat as it currently is.
Thank you, Ben, for really underlining how big this problem is. So with that being said, Vic, I'd love to welcome you to talk about actions that people can start to take now that we know what the problem is and how we want to move forward.
Sure, thank you. So I'm Vic Mohenka, Clean Energy Organizer at Clean Water Action. I work out of our Boston office. I'm located in Worcester, if anyone is local. And I wanted to also add in our mission statement here to protect our environment, health, economic well-being, and community quality of life. Just everyone, a lot of people think that we only work on water issues, but we're a broad-based environmental organization. And we think about a lot of these issues through the lens of environmental health and community health. So I just wanted to put that out there, that that's the lens that we take to solar energy, and that's why it's so important. When we talk about solar, we're not just talking about climate, we're also talking about the health effects and the effects that it could have for regular people, help afford utility bills, etc. Cool. So I am going to paste in links to everything in the chat, but I want to talk to you all first about all the different actions that you could take and how this all works. So we've been talking about the SMART program with Ben, and they are, the DOER, the Department of Energy Resources, is wrapping up its 400 megawatt review process. That's what they're calling this stage of the regulatory process. And this Friday at 10 a.m. to noon, there's going to be a virtual public hearing that everyone can participate in. So you can come and watch what other people are saying in the comments. If you have something you want to say to DOER, you could submit those directly. And you can speak actually on solar energy policy at that virtual public hearing. There's going to be a lot of different organizations and solar companies that are representing a broad range of views and issues at that public hearing. Additionally, there are written comments. You can submit those by June 1st. So if you wanted to send an email, something specific to DOER, it was extended. Somebody asked if it was extended in the chat. So you have until June 1st to submit those comments. If you are with an organization in Massachusetts or that is concerned with Massachusetts solar policy, you have the option of signing on to the Mass Power Forward letter. So that letter covers a bunch of different issues with solar energy. It talks about how we need a lot more solar to reach our climate goals. It talks about how we need to make sure that the way that we develop solar energy also maximizes how much of our natural resources that we can conserve, trying to reduce the amount of clear cutting or building solar in places where the land has other value. Solar is a really great resource because it can go places that we're not using, on top of parking lots, on roofs. Those aren't spaces that we need. So we're going to have that link in chat. Please only do that if you are with an organization, and that's going to go right to DOER as part of a big coalition effort. We can go to the next one. So at this point, I also want to say that we don't think there's all that much that we're going to be able to get for the solar industry through SMART in the short term. The department is not looking to do a complete overhaul of the regulations, in the near future. And there's a lot of need, as you saw, for more solar policies to change the way that it works to help developers and to make sure more benefits go straight to people. So one thing that I'm going to paste in the chat is a clean water action, online action. What that is, it's a pre-form letter that you can send to your state legislators, that's your state senator and your state representative, and it also sends a copy to Governor Baker. All this stuff, whenever we talk about DOER, DPU, all of that is under Governor Baker. Ultimately, he is the chief decision maker of all of the executive branch policy. In addition to that, we need to make sure that we're fighting for these bills at the legislature to help push solar energy forward. So the Clean Water Action, our website will have you support 2 different bills that were written in conjunction with these organizations and a couple others to focus on what is needed for low-income solar energy. There's also a ton of other bills, things like making sure that every home is solar ready, things that increase the caps, all sorts of energy issues are up for debate at the legislature. So I definitely recommend that you talk to your state legislator. You know, the governor's offices, the DPU, can only be as good as the laws that are on paper for them to follow. And then the other thing that I would really strongly urge, if this is interesting to you, sign up for Vote Solar and Resonance websites. I'm going to paste those links into chat too. It's really great to get updates and see what's going on. Part of the reason we're doing this webinar is because I saw the Resonant newsletter and was like, oh, this is a really great thing that we should do a webinar on to make sure more people can get involved with this issue. So I'm going to post it in. Hopefully it looks good for everyone. So the first link, it's going to be the, excuse me, the DOER website that talks about the public hearing. It's got all the regulations on it, guidelines. So if there's one specific part of this that you're more interested in, the DOER has more details on how they interpret the words that are in the regulations. There's a sign-on letter for Mass Power Forward. So that's how your organization can sign on to support this letter to DOER for now. The Clean Water Action Low-Income Solar Access page, so you can send something to the decision makers that are local to you. And then Resonant and Vote Solar. For Resonant, you have to scroll to the bottom of the page and then type in your info and you can get on their newsletter. It's got really good information on it. Cool, and yeah, I saw a bunch of great questions in chat, so we can talk about some of the stuff in the Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Vic, for your presentation. And yeah, now we can turn to the questions. Let's see if I can get them open here. I'll stop sharing my screen for a moment so I can open up the questions. There we go. So first up, from Al Blake, why don't we have any options for community-owned solar? What's that about?
Happy to take a stab at that one. And so, yeah, so I think as you may know, we work with co-op power, which is one example of, I think, how that can work. They're a co-op based in Massachusetts, actually closely associated with the early work that I and my partner did in solar. You know, so the short answer would be that cooperatives like co-op power could be one example of how communities could take ownership of the solar projects themselves, noting that there's been very little of that so far. Some of the really important barriers and why there has not been so much of it, just to list them, is securities laws are very complicated and can be very costly to navigate. So right now it is actually in a lot of ways illegal for communities or multiple people to collectively own a solar project. And I know that some people from SDA Solar Design Associates are on. They've tried to navigate that process themselves, the project they did, so they're a really good resource. So securities law is a problem. I think that the complexity, like Stephen mentioned, is a big problem, that to be able to explain to people what it means to own a solar project. Right now, there just has to be a lot of education first before people can make that decision in an informed way. And then access to capital is the other really big one. Is there are structural limitations on who can get enough capital to purchase part of a solar array. So, you know, that could be addressed through access to capital. There's good organizations working on that as well. The Ujima project is one example of trying to get more access to capital into the hands of people in EJ communities. But I think it has to be some combination of all of those things, which would be, you know, public education, access to capital, and assistance with the technical issues like navigating securities laws that would make it possible. For my money, I think we have to get to more community ownership of solar projects before we can have an equitable industry. So I think it's a really important question and an important problem to solve.
Thank you for that one. Someone asked, how does the SMART program work with a municipal electricity company?
We've done some work with that as well, you know, and I guess the short answer is that some municipal companies, municipal light plants, as you may know them, are really have been encouraging and have helped solar along, and some not so much. I know that Belmont is an example of a relatively wealthier community that has done a really good job as far as their MLP in incentivizing solar. And I know that that Holyoke is another good example that's been focusing on it. Some municipalities have just not been thinking about it at all, so it creates this patchwork quilt, and it can make it difficult for a provider to know how to navigate. The benefit, I think, is if you're in a municipal light plant district, you're going to have much better access to the decision makers for how that thing is operated than any of us who live in one of the Eversource or National Grid territories. So the chance of advocacy being successful is much greater. And, you know, I think we would just need broad-based efforts to push that municipality to be more favorable for solar.
Acting at the local level, I like it. We got a question from Catherine. What do you see as the most effective strategies for getting strong solar and EJ legislation passed? Super important.
Yeah, I can help take that. So we have some good news, and that's that both chambers of our legislature want to pass climate legislation this session. We don't exactly know when this session will end or how it's going to work because of the coronavirus. But basically, I would just suggest that you talk to your state representative and your state senator. It's really good to let them know what you care about. That's the biggest thing that I could tell people. You know, full disclosure, I used to work in the state house for a state legislator. And basically, you know, what I tell people, you want your legislator to go to the state house and say, you know, my constituents told me they wanted this thing, so that's why it has to be in whatever bill we're talking about. So that's the really important thing. If you can send that signal to your state legislator that their constituents, which is you know, want something, and then they relay that on, like that's how we can make things happen. I'll say that one other plug I can give is to join the Mass Power Forward Coalition. A lot of the big environmental groups are in it, like 350, Sierra Club, Clean Water Action. And basically, we have a strategy this session of going to the legislature and just asking them for very ambitious things and very like broad general things. So you could kind of say like one of our goals is 100% renewable energy. So you could say, you know, this is extremely important to me, and there's no way we're going to get there without solar energy being part of the equation. So I strongly suggest, if you don't already know your state senator and your state rep, get to know them, drop them an email, a call. Calls are always the best way to do it. That gets the most attention. It takes the most time from people on Beacon Hill. So I'd really suggest calling into those offices.
Great. And Vic, you touched on this a little bit, but has there been any indication of how COVID-19 might affect the government's approach to solar incentives?
I don't really have an answer for that on the incentives level. I think there's probably some response in terms of how installers are responding, you know, keeping people safe, not going into homes as much. I'll say that basically for a lot of decision makers, that one thing we're seeing is for, you know, this would be kind of considered a non-essential function of government, that a lot of the non-essential debates, those are being pushed back. So we were expecting to be able to talk about solar energy at the State House around, you know, June, July, and it looks like they'll be busy figuring out what to do with the budget. So we really might not even have a hack at this till July, August, September.
Great. We got a question here asking, is co-op housing eligible for extra subsidies? Whom should a representative of a co-op housing building contact to get started?
Yeah, I think right now, community-owned or cooperatively owned arrays are not, they don't receive any extra benefit. It just hasn't been a priority on the part of policymakers. It's really been on the map to incentivize community ownership. I will say that the Green Justice Coalition, of which Clean Water Action is a member, has been doing good advocacy for a long time now, pushing for more community ownership of clean energy or clean technology in general. So the Green Justice Coalition is a good, good advocate for that. And then as far as a cooperative housing group participating, I guess just to put in a plug for Resonant, we would be happy to look into that with you. They're complicated projects, and there's a lot of navigating to be done. In particular, how does your own organization's decision-making process work? But if you can navigate that, then we can help you go solar.
Awesome. Question here, how does community solar fit into the picture, both in terms of accessing smart subsidies and in terms of providing discounted solar electricity to low-income communities?
You want to take a crack at that one, Stephen?
Sure. If I understand the question correctly, I mean, community solar, basically community solar has its own smart adder for low-income projects, right? So if you're saying that you're in the queue and you're building a solar project that benefits a certain percentage of folks who are on the discount rate, so you're going to get a separate compensation rate for that. Obviously, like if for folks who don't know, participating in one of those arrays, basically you're getting an account within the larger solar array that could be at this point somewhere in your service territory that's not your home, that you can remote net meter and sort of avail yourselves of the benefits of the solar panel while you're paying into it. If that answers the question, I think that was what the question was, but.
Anything to add?
Yeah, I could. I might just add to that that's just right. You're getting you're buying the net metering credit essentially, like Stephen said. One nuance that's been added to that in the SMART policy is that there's now another kind of credit called a alternative bill credit that is sort of like a net metering credit, but not exactly. I'm happy to go over any more detailed questions people have about that. But, you know, the bottom line is that, you know, let's say that Vic owns a solar array out near Greenfield. Then, you know, and if I live in Springfield, let's say, in theory, I could buy the credits that are produced by Vic's array, and it would usually be at a discount. So, you know, so I could spend, I could get a 10% discount on my electricity by buying it from Vic's array. That's generally how those are set up.
We got another question here. Is there / will there be policy protecting homeowner solar equity access, like restricting, I don't know how to say that word, abutters? Okay, thank you. From building in ways that could block sunlight?
I'm not aware of anything like that. Stephen and Vicky, you heard anything like around protection of abutters?
I have not. That feels no. Yeah, that feels like that would live in like a non-solar specific territory of just like nuisance law, a private nuisance of someone like building something blocking your access to solar, but I'm not sure there's anything specific that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of this question is like this, like having an assumption that every roof should have panels on it, which is just not possible. It's kind of just unfortunate. Like if you have a house that has like a neighbor's trees blocking it from being viable for solar, I think that's one reason why community shared solar is so important. Not that specific case, because I don't know how common that is, but a lot of people don't have roofs that they own. So that's why we need to make sure that if we're gonna use public policy in this way to help people with their utility bills, we should make it so that, you know, you don't need to own a roof to be able to access the benefits from that program.
And we got a question here asking, how does SMART work with the Solarize Plus program? Are folks familiar with that program?
Yeah. Yeah, so my understanding is the Solarize Plus program is, you know, it provides a way to get discounted bulk purchasing of solar systems for people on a community basis. That would be the Solarize part. And then the plus part would be that people get access to some other kind of related technology at a bulk purchase rate at the same time. So my understanding is that it would be like heat pumps and solar systems, or possibly batteries, or things of that nature at the same time. So there's no, you know, there's no direct policy mechanism that I can think of that connects those two programs, other than SMART improves the financial benefit of owning a solar array overall, and so it's kind of the fuel in a way for those solarized programs, because it makes you know, much more financially like attractive for people to get solar systems, and you know, and I guess just to tie it back with what we've been talking about today, it's great if you can have a solarized program in general, but if the structural incentive, you know, underneath it, which would be SMART, does not solve barriers for adoption in environmental justice neighborhoods, then there's really not much you can do as a solarized community. It's also worth noting that a lot of the solarized communities, especially the ones that have had the highest rates of adoption, have been in like the suburbs of Boston and relatively wealthier areas out in the western part of the state. And, you know, I want to be clear, like we need more solar arrays overall. So I don't want to poo-poo people who are taking the lead and installing solar arrays. I really don't intend to shame anyone who's doing that just because they don't live in a city or an environmental justice neighborhood. But I guess my point is that like solar is a great program, but we need to fix the underlying smart policy first, or it's not going to be that helpful of a tool, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I would also say that Solarize, as I understand it, is like for a lot of small behind the meter projects, so small residential, small, you know, businesses. And a lot of times when we talk about solar policy, you really have to keep in mind that like the policies that are affecting residences are completely different than if you want to build like a football field size solar project. And a lot of times the residential side and the big, you know, the big utility scale is what they call it side, work very different. And then the community shared projects end up being on the utility scale policies. So when we talk about the challenges to solar, a lot of the things that we're talking about might not even apply if you're just trying to get solar on your roof, you know, for the residential side.
Thank you for answering all those questions, everyone. And now looking at the time, we've gone a little bit over, but I think it was okay because we got to share a lot of good information in the Q&A. On screen right now, you'll see all of our panelists, their contact information. Should you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to them. Thank you so much for participating and attending. You will receive a follow-up email from us with the recorded link and a PDF of the slides shared tonight. Thank you once again for joining us, and please feel free to reach out anytime. Bye, all.